Is the real estate bubble in Portland finally popping? Here we go again with the clickbait. Well, in this video, we're going to look at how things have been doing in the past 5 years. We're going to look at the areas that have appreciated. We're going to look at the areas that haven't been doing so well. And if we're looking at how the market is today and what to expect in the future, it can be really useful to look back, in recent history, 2, 3, 5 years, because a lot happened in that time and a lot has changed in that time. So if you want to learn more about how the real estate market is doing in Portland, what areas are doing well, what areas not so much, stay tuned to learn more. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Paul Clem with the Oregon Relocation Team coming to you from Portland, Oregon. In this video, we're going to look at recent history, how things have been going in the real estate market in Portland, and again, what areas are doing well, what areas are not doing so well, and what areas are just kind of humming along. So the real estate market leading up to 2020 through 2019 was really a good, strong market, pretty balanced, but we were seeing solid price appreciation, kind of across the Portland metro area. And then come 2020, everything goes absolutely bananas. Interest rates are historically low, and there is this massive shortage of inventory, but there's also this really high demand for a lot of people to relocate to different areas for different reasons. And so you kind of have this combination that set the real estate market absolutely on fire. And we saw 40, 45, 50 plus percent price appreciation over the course of really 24 months, maybe even a little bit less. But kind of that mid 2020 to mid 2022 was absolute gangbusters and probably won't be anything we see again in our lifetime. Now, when we're looking at the real estate market today, it's hard to forget how things were in that time period because it was so recent. But starting around mid 2022, things really kind of got flipped on their head. There was a lot of inflation in the economy. And because of that, interest rates started to rise steadily. And around that mid 2022 timeframe is when we started to see an uptick in interest rates, all the way up to 7%, over 8% for some time, and still hovering around that 7% mark compared to 2%, 2.5%, 3% in 2020, 2021, and the beginning of 2022. That is an enormous increase in terms of what people are actually paying in terms of a monthly payment if they are financing. Now, hey, if this is your first time to the channel or you've been here and you haven't already and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button, tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. And we've helped so many people relocate to Portland and move to the Portland metro area. And as real estate professionals, we absolutely love to help with that process. So if that's you, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video. Schedule a Zoom call with us and we can talk more about your move. Okay, so during this absolutely wild time in real estate, we were hitting all-time high after all-time high after all-time high for median home value across the country. And some markets were super hot. Some markets maybe not as much, but everywhere in the country felt the effects of, this type of real estate market. And Portland and the metro area was certainly no exception. So once things kind of did a 180, now we are 2.5 plus years into a higher interest rate environment where, mortgage rates doubled, tripled, but home values have not come down by a commensurate rate. So because of that, we're seeing far less affordability than we had in the earlier part of this decade. And so the market has really been pretty resilient. But in this video, I'm not going to bore you anymore. We'll jump right into it here, I promise. We're going to talk about what areas have been much more resilient, what areas have continued to appreciate, where has the demand continued to focus on, and where has the demand shied away from. All right, so I know it's not the most exciting thing to look at here, when we're just looking at a chart, but if we're looking at the areas that have appreciated the least in the last 5 years, the big one that jumps out here is Portland. I'll break this down a little more as we move on, but obviously Portland being, up only 18% in the last 5 years, that definitely jumps out. Fairview, that's Gresham, Wood Village, Troutdale area. So that's in this Wood Village area. Happy Valley, a little bit of a head scratcher, up only 24%. Newburgh, an outlying community, kind of an exurb bedroom community, so not quite within the metro area or within the metro urban growth boundary. But that's still up 32%. So that's kind of a clear like demarcation there. I think if we're looking at how things are doing, or rather the areas that are doing the worst, because if say if you divide 30 by 5, you're getting kind of that 5-ish% annual growth rate, which is actually, if you zoom out like 50, 60 years, 3, 4, 5% it's right in that pocket. So, we're not seeing necessarily the same boom as we are in some of these middle tier areas in terms of growth, but we're seeing good, consistent growth, at least when you compare it to, these bottom few, Happy Valley, Wood Village, Fairview, that area, and then Portland in particular. And then if you look at the other end of the spectrum here, so Sauvie Island, this is an island that is in Multnomah County. It's basically connected to Portland on kind of the northwest side of Portland, but there's like one bridge on, one bridge off. It's a really cool community. There's like pumpkin patches and berry farms, and you can go out there and pick flowers and stuff. It's pretty cool. Up 83% in the last 5 years, so that's wild. Camas, Washougal, these are communities on the east side of Vancouver that are neighboring each other. So you see Camas up a little more, but also Washougal up 53%. Estacada is going to be just east of Happy Valley, so kind of the same region, like Newburgh, an exurb or outerlying small town, but up 50% in Estacada. St. Helens, also kind of that exurb, type community on the north side in Columbia County. And then we get into Lake Oswego, which is, right in the heart of the metro area. I'm sure you're familiar with it. At this point, if you're watching this video, up 48%. Ridgefield, also in Washington on the north side of Vancouver, ton of new construction and a ton of development there. Battleground, another kind of rural small town outlying community, Vancouver. So we're seeing this whole Vancouver area with a ton of growth in the last 5 years. Beaverton, Troutdale, Canby, and then we have a few right at 40. So Westland, Tigard, Sandy, McMinnville. So again, there's a ton of nuance and things that I can dig into and try to speculate about here, as far as why these different suburbs or towns are landing where they do. But I think anything about this 40 mark and up is definitely showing a lot of resilience and continued positive growth for the most part. We'll talk more about that. And then we see this, these bottom few that are noticeably appreciating far less, or in the case of Wood Village, appreciating not at all in the last 5 years. Okay, quick timeout from the chart there. I want to talk a little bit more about recent history and how to kind of evaluate what we're looking at here. So, like we talked about, there was this, crazy real estate boom, that bubbled up until about mid 2022 and then plateaued. And then from there, we've seen the market recede for sure in the Portland metro area. For the most part, across the country, we've seen the real estate market it definitely dip down from those, that quote pandemic high in terms of real estate values. And some areas receded a ton, some have stayed pretty resilient. Portland was definitely an area that receded a fair amount. And I don't know if it's actually even reflected in the data necessarily, where, anecdotally, we're seeing a lot of instances where homes are selling for closer to what they would have listed for or sold for pre-pandemic, so right about 2019 or 2020 before things really started to take off. So again, anecdotally, I've seen a ton of cases where homes are being listed for, or they're sitting and ultimately selling for around what they would have sold for 5 years ago. But, if we look at this broadly, I think the market probably dipped 10 to 12%. So let's say over the past 5 years, so let's say on average, and this is about right if you look at that chart, things appreciated about 40% and there probably was like a 10 or 12% dip in home values from as an effect of a rapid increase in interest rates. And then in the last 18 to 24 months, we've seen things kind of slowly start to touch that pandemic high as far as home values go. And then when you break this down, different suburbs and towns surrounding Portland, and then Portland itself, you can see where things have kind of climbed back all the way, or maybe started to exceed that pandemic high number, around mid 2022. And then you can see where things have receded and not continued to appreciate from there. So we definitely see a tale of two markets, or really multiple kind of micro markets throughout Portland and the metro area. Okay, so at least speaking broadly and to where we're seeing demand go, we're seeing demand move away from a lot of this East County, Gresham, Troutdale, Wood Village, Fairview area. And I don't know where Troutdale is on this list, so I don't want to disparage that. So yeah, I mean, Troutdale's up 41% in the last 5 years. So Troutdale, an outlier from Wood Village and Fairview, but same general area, let's say. So Multnomah County, that's a big one. Portland, obviously, Multnomah County, the big city in the metro area. We're seeing, the demand as shown by the lack of appreciation over the past 5 years. We're seeing the demand move away from Portland, Multnomah County, again, Wood Village, Fairview, and then Happy Valley is such a weird one because, it's this really beautiful kind of wooded, rolling hills, newly developed area, very suburban, very much a category of area that in that 2020 to 2022 real estate boom, the type of area that a lot of people were flocking to. If they were leaving the city, a lot of people wanted like kind of a nice, quiet, safe, suburban feeling area. Happy Valley fits that to a T, as much as anywhere else in the Portland metro area. So most of Happy Valley is developed or has been developed over the past 10, 15, maybe 20 years, and it's still developing. This is an area where there's, some of the highest volume of new construction going on in the Portland metro area is happening in Happy Valley. My take on this is that it's not so much that the demand of Happy Valley has receded. It's probably that there was a little bit of a ceiling that was being hit anyway, because this was this kind of new, bright and shiny, clean, safe, suburban, up and coming, type area that a lot of people were already flocking to some degree before this real estate boom. So I think that it probably, again, there was probably some kind of ceiling that we were already butting up against. And, median sale price 670, average home price about 700. I mean, you can see that these numbers are already a lot higher than other suburban areas. Hillsborough, in the 550s, even Tualatin, a very nice area comparable to Happy Valley, 615, 617 on these kind of median and average numbers. So Happy Valley was already, probably rapidly appreciating quite a bit leading up to 2020. So that's probably why we're seeing that there. Whereas again, I know for a fact that, during that real estate boom that happened in the last 5 years, there was a ton of demand for Happy Valley and a lot of people moving there. Whereas Multnomah County, in particular, Portland, and these other two areas that are on the bottom of this list, are areas where people were moving from. We also saw since 2020 some new income taxes that were enacted at the county level in Multnomah County, that was just part of a number of reasons why the people who wanted to leave were leaving, let's say. Now, if we switch over to the opposite end of the spectrum, what were some of the areas people were flocking to? Well, one of the things that really stands out is Washington State in general. So in the Portland metro area, Vancouver is right on that north side, very much a part of the overall population, of the Portland metro area. So that's Vancouver, is kind of the quote unquote big city there with a population of a couple 100,000 people. So Vancouver's a really, really big, heavily, densely populated area. And then Battleground, Ridgefield, Washougal, Camas, these are bedroom communities, kind of smaller suburbs of Vancouver. They're all a little bit different. Ridgefield, I think, like I mentioned earlier, kind of like Happy Valley in a way, where it's also new in terms of all the development that's going on. An area like Battleground, is this kind of smaller, more rural feeling, small town type community. And then Camas is kind of an upscale feeling small town in a way. It's like almost has more of like a Lake Oswego feel to it. When you compare the little downtown area to like an area like Lake Oswego, for example, Camas has always been a little bit higher priced, and you look at that kind of the median, 814, about 880. So a lot higher than just about any suburb of Portland. And then Washougal is right there again, right next to Camas. So it looks like a big part of people's motivation for, maybe relocating within the metro area and the demand for people moving into the area is taxes. Is a big motivation where Oregon has one of the highest income taxes in the country. Washington State doesn't have any income tax. And of course, Washington State has a sales tax, but Oregon doesn't. So if you live in Camas, if you live in Vancouver, even if you live all the way up in Battleground or Ridgefield, you can get down to Portland, and you can get down to Oregon and buy stuff, save on the sales tax, but live in Washington State and save on the income tax. Now, if you work in Oregon and live in Vancouver, you're still subject to that state income tax. So, you can play that game a little bit, but you have to be, you have to understand, what the implications are, not just where you live, but also where you work. But again, at least part of the motivation, I would assume, of getting up into Washington State again is some of the tax benefits that you have being up there, and also some affordability too. So if you hold, I mean, with the exception of Camas, I would say, but if you hold Washougal, Ridgefield, Vancouver proper, Battleground up against a lot of areas of Portland and the metro area on the Oregon side, you're going to get a lot more affordability. You can get more house for your money. So sometimes you can get bigger, nicer, newer up in Washington. And then again, also maybe have some of those tax benefits as well. So I'll talk a little more about some of the trends that we're seeing just looking at this list. But like I mentioned, over the past 5 years, if you look at kind of that 40% and up is where I would say, that pandemic real estate boom has kind of held steady. And we've even seen appreciation in the last 2 or 3 years in a higher interest rate environment. So these are areas that are going to be the most resilient, at least right now, in terms of real estate values. So a lot of these are just your run-of-the-mill Portland suburbs. Some are closer in, some are further out. And focusing on the higher end of this list, again, you have all the Washington State stuff. You also have, I think, this trend toward more rural areas, kind of these exurbs, outlying small towns. So Battleground, even Camas, and Ridgefield, the areas in Washington, also check that box. But if we look at Sauvie Island, up 83%, a staggering 83% in the past 5 years. You have this like very private, safe, quiet, rural, country feeling island community, surrounded by water. It's beautiful farmland, but you're like a 10-minute drive, maybe 15-minute drive into downtown Portland. So you kind of have this best of both worlds where you have this like, very rural environment, But if you still work in Portland or if you still want to get into the city from time to time, Sauvie Island is as good of a place as you could be. And it has kind of this exclusivity feel to it because it's an island, I think. There's only so much land, there's only so much space, there's only so many houses. And so it's kind of a special place to be. I have a really good friend whose parents lived there for like the past 10 years. They just moved, but they absolutely loved it. And, they spent a ton of time improving their land and building out this like, eco-friendly compound, and they could walk across the road, put their kayaks in the river. So, I mean, really, really cool place to live. Kind of a one-off thing in some ways because it is so rural. There are only so many houses there. It's not a place that really most people are going to be gravitating toward. But I think it kind of symbolizes at least one segment of people who, at the top of their list, is to be in a less urban area, albeit, still being in kind of a major metro area. Because in that same breath, St. Helens, Estacada, also smaller towns, bedroom communities of the metro area, still in close enough distance to Portland, but far enough away to be at a kind of a safe distance if that's what you're looking for. So then the outlier here on the top end of this range is Lake Oswego for sure. You have Beaverton, I mean even like Troutdale, Canby's one of those like smaller outlying towns. West Lynn is up there, Tigard. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but Lake Oswego is really an outlier because, I mean, look at the average sale price in 2024, almost 1.2 million, or the median, 940. And over the last 5 years, we've seen nearly 10% a year growth, 48% over that time in the market appreciation. And so it's not just that this is a very popular area that I think a lot of people, for different reasons, would love to live in. It's great schools, it's safe, has like this awesome small town community feel, but it's like, a 12-minute drive up to downtown Portland. You're right on the river. Of course, you have the lake, great parks. I mean, you could sing Lake Oswego's praises all day long. It's no secret, and it's definitely easy to see why this is a very high demand, desirable area, but it's the most expensive area in the Portland metro area. So this is an outlier on this list, only in that, if you look at like general affordability, it kind of goes out the window when you're looking at Lake Oswego, and it definitely shows you the things that people are prioritizing, I guess. And to some degree, it's interesting. It's interesting in that, say, like, okay, like I was talking about Happy Valley, really a lot of like similar attributes to Lake Oswego, and at least in some ways, as far as what people's priorities are and what would bring them into an area, but we've only seen a 24% increase over the past 5 years, where literally double the appreciation in Lake Oswego. It's kind of showing me that there was like a little bit of a ceiling in Happy Valley, whereas Lake Oswego could continue to grow and get more expensive in that way. Another thing too is like Happy Valley is continuing to grow and expand. And there's more and more construction going on. Where Lake Oswego, it's like a much older, much more established community. There's not as much room to build and grow in Lake Oswego, so you have this kind of so you have a lot more scarcity there too. I would say that either way, one way or another, Lake Oswego is the least like, kind of this like top eight areas where we're seeing the most price appreciation. But even again, Beaverton, 42%, like that's still very significant. If Lake Oswego is 48%, 42% is still pretty darn high. So there's actually quite a few areas that still remain in pretty high demand. If we're looking at average market appreciation over the past 50 years, again, it's right about 4.5%. I say like 4 to 6% because there's, several years where it's up over 5%, and there's several years where it can be like 2 or 3%, but average over the past 5 decades is about 4.5%. So we're looking at like double that in the past 5 years or more in about 20 of these different communities. And then, even solidly 6, 7% across some of these major suburban areas throughout Portland. So some of these areas, it's a little more obscure talking about it, like especially, like I'm mentioning bedroom communities or smaller rural feeling type communities. It's not like those all can be, painted with one broad brushstroke. Each of those areas are going to be different. But it's easy, especially when you're coming in from out of the area and you don't have a ton of familiarity with these different areas. Uh, at least I would think it's easier to like kind of bunch these places into groupings or categories. And one of those categories that I think would be useful to look at are the close in suburbs. So there's this groupings of suburbs in the Portland metro area that are bordering Portland around each side. And I think it's really important to kind of consider those areas in that I think as those areas go, the rest of the metro area goes, because of course there's going to be people who want to be in Portland and be in an urban area and kind of get that experience. There's people that want to be as much on the outskirts as they could possibly be, as long as they can kind of justify the commutes and things like that. And people that even want to be in some of these outlying bedroom communities in more of a small town, rural feel, slower pace of life, maybe leaning a little more conservative potentially in some ways. And then there's these like in between suburban areas bordering Portland, where I think those are the people that represent, or those areas represent the largest majority of people, I would think, in that it's people who kind of want the best of both worlds. They want a little bit of a slower pace of life, a little quieter, a little safer, suburban environment, but they also want to be able to get into the city and get into Portland and enjoy, some of the amenities and things that, the city can offer without living like right in the city and also without living out in the country. So quickly, we'll look at these Portland bordering suburbs are doing. So Happy Valley, we talked about. This is kind of as far south and east as you can get, still bordering Portland. A little bit further out in terms of suburbs with proximity to the urban center, but 24% in the last 5 years. Not as much growth, as a lot of these different areas. Milwaukee, probably the closest suburb, maybe outside of Beaverton to Portland, but it's basically borders southeast Portland. Just on the southern border of southeast Portland, you have Milwaukee. It's right on the river. From anywhere in Milwaukee, you can get basically up into anywhere in Portland pretty quickly. Even if you're getting up into Northwest Portland, for example, just because it's so centrally located, but just south of Portland, kind of like Milwaukee. It's right across, kind of like Lake Oswego. It's right across the river from Lake Oswego on the east side. But Milwaukee, 33% increase, so definitely well above the annual average over the past 50 years, but not as much growth as some other areas. Okay, Gresham, Multnomah County, so Gresham is a suburb that's kind of in a category amongst itself in that it's this really, really big suburb. I mean, I think there's like a couple 100,000 people in Gresham, or at least like well over 150,000 people. Really big land area. So I think Gresham is the second biggest city in the Portland metro area. And top 10 in Oregon population wise, maybe top 5. 38% increase though. I don't know exactly what to attribute that to. A lot of East County, we've probably seen, less growth to some degree, or at least a little bit less demand. So East County being East Multnomah County, the parts of Portland that are starting to border up against Gresham. As you get into Gresham proper, downtown Gresham has this, cool little downtown area. And then especially as you get east in Gresham and a little bit south in Gresham too, you get a little more of that rural type atmosphere. You start to get a little bit closer to Mount Hood. So you have a lot more access to nature, rivers, hiking. Again, get up to the mountain. That could be a big draw to the area if we look at some of the primary reasons why people are or have been moving the last 5 years, but still really solid appreciation there in Gresham. Tigard bordering Portland on the southwest side up 40%. Beaverton bordering Portland all along the west side of Portland up 42%. Again, we talked about Vancouver up 45%. And then Lake Oswego 48%. So these are the suburbs that are bordering Portland's border, or there's maybe some unincorporated county area that's a little bit of a buffer, but these are, the cities, the suburbs that are actually abutting Portland's border. So kind of interesting. You see a lot of these, most of these, in fact, really outside of Happy Valley, I guess, that are well above, that 50-year average, where Portland, the biggest city, the biggest population, is where you're seeing far less appreciation in home values. There's a few other suburbs that are interesting to look at, which are kind of properly in the metro area, but kind of a second layer of suburbs. Oregon City up 32%. Hillsboro, bordering Beaverton on the west side, up 36%. Tualatin, bordering kind of Tigard, just south of Tigard, 36%. Wilsonville, south of Tualatin, 36%. Sherwood, 38% on the southwest side. Westland, still up 40%, just south of Lake Oswego. And then Troutdale, north of Gresham, all the way out east, up 41%. So I don't know if it's just this Wood Village, Fairview area. It's just before Troutdale. I don't know if this is an area that, for whatever reason, it's become far less desirable. But just east of there, you have Troutdale, which is still pretty high on the list. So bordering each other, but two vastly different markets there. Okay, I've probably rambled on way longer than I anticipated, but I think it will be good to look at what's happened in the last 12 months, because this 5-year period incorporates this, crazy real estate boom that happened over 2.5 years. And then things started to plateau, and then things started to recede. And then in the last year is where we've probably seen things balance a little bit more. And I think the last 12 months is going to be pretty representative of what we can anticipate in the years to come. As long as interest rates stay above 6%, above 6.5%, right around 7%, we're going to see a lot of what we've seen in the last 12 months. Now, if rates come down to 6% or less, it's tough to say, but we will see a lot more movement. We'll see a lot more transactions happening. But we'll probably also see a lot of people who now have the ability to move so they can sell their house too. So it's hard to know what impact interest rates coming down would have on how many more new homes would hit the market. But again, there's no expectation that rates are going to come down in the near future significantly. So if we look at the last 12 months, again, that's probably going to be more representative of what we can expect in the coming months, maybe the next couple of years. Okay, so what's doing the worst? I will go through this much quicker, I promise. Doing the worst. Okay, Wood Village, yeah, that was already at the top of the list. Interestingly, Battleground, up 46%, wild in the past 5 years, down 10%. So this is an area that had more of a boom probably and is, still coming back down to earth. This is one of those more rural type communities north of Vancouver. Fairview, Sandy. Okay, West Lynn is an interesting one where we're up 40%. Really, really nice, desirable community. Just small town feel, great little downtown area, great schools. If you like Lake Oswego, you'll like West Lynn, and you don't necessarily have to pay the Lake Oswego prices. You're a little bit further south in the metro area, so not quite as close to downtown Portland, but up 40%, down 3%. This isn't an area that is going to see a dramatic shift probably in demand necessarily, and that it's not going to change. It's already very well established. So, I'm seeing down 3% means it kind of hit that ceiling, and it's probably a good buy now opportunity, honestly. Okay, but you see all these areas in the last 12 months that haven't appreciated at all. 0, 1, 2%. Portland, Tualatin, Sherwood, Vancouver, again, whereas Vancouver was up 45%, even Lake Oswego up 48%. These are areas now that aren't appreciating more in the last 12 months. So there's different stuff happening here where Portland probably was up 40%, let's say, from 2020 to mid 2022, and it's probably receded like 20%, So that's where we get this number. It probably shot way up and went way down. Whereas like Lake Oswego, for example, or Sherwood or Tualatin, some of these true Portland suburbs, you're seeing these numbers and they probably have just hit a ceiling in some regards. So they're up significantly in the past 5 years, but in the last 12 months they're not really appreciating in the same way. Happy Valley's right in there. On the other end of this list, we can look at some of the areas that are still appreciating significantly in the past 12 months, not just in the past 5 years, but in the past 1 year. So Beaverton still up 5% above that 50-year average. Gresham, St. Helens, Washougal, Camas, that area, some areas of Vancouver, Ridgefield, is up there 14%. That's wild. All of it's in Ridgefield, there's so much new construction that might just be that there was a lot more larger homes being built or that were sold in the last 12 months in an area like that. But any of these areas where we're seeing like 5+% growth in the past 12 months really tells you that these are areas that are continuing to grow despite a lot of the market receding in the past 24 months. These areas are really the areas that are doing the best. One thing I'll point out about Savia Island that had the largest growth in the past 5 years. Look, last year there was 10 homes sold. So that's an extremely small sample size, really kind of a one-off. But again, I think it does represent the draw to more of a rural setting to some degree. If you look at some of the areas with the higher volume of homes sold, almost 1,000 homes sold last year in Beaverton, up 5%. Gresham up 6%. Camas, 400 homes. It's like a pretty small town, up 11%. So still just, really, really high growth areas that people continue to flock to. Okay. I know that was a lot. I hope there was some good stuff that you were able to take away from that. If you are thinking about moving to the Portland metro area, and if you want to talk more about different areas, what the demand is, how prices are appreciating or not, I don't think that should be the deciding factor necessarily. And again, there's going to be different reasons in different areas. There's all these different micro markets going on simultaneously, for prices being up, prices being down, or prices, mostly kind of staying put. So if you want to talk more about different areas, what the market is like in those particular areas, and why prices are doing what they're doing, or if you just want to talk about Portland in general, what the process might be like moving to Portland from out of the area, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video. Schedule a Zoom call with us. We can talk more about it. If this video was helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, really appreciate you watching. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.